Hello everyone, my name is Fox. This is Anbernic's latest device, their RG353M. Thank you very much to Anbernic for sending this out to me for review. Now obviously their M stands for their metal case here. Now this is their anodized like deep purple. It is really nice. I actually really like the look of this, but it's just sensationally hard to actually record and also combat the screen brightness with how dark the device is itself. So it's a bit of a challenge trying to record this video. Hopefully it comes through okay. We're going to go through all the different things here. Now, Anbernic is once again using the RK3566 on this, so performance is pretty much understood. You should not anticipate going over Dreamcast here. We're going to be doing N64 and Dreamcast and Nintendo DS really as like a top-end bar. We're going to go into some game demos later on in this, but we're going to go start with talking about the build quality and then talk about Linux and Android and then kind of finish it up and my thoughts on it. So up first, let's talk about the specs and build quality. So on the back here, we see we have a 3500 milliamp hour battery. What that actually translates to, and I ran it through a test, we're getting around 7 hours of battery life, screen brightness at default, and speakers blaring. So having it go for 7 hours on a full charge is really excellent. Standby times have been really good. Charging times is about 2 hours. So overall, a solid entry and kind of what to expect with these devices. Nothing that is standing out in any particular way, but overall very good. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's just go around on the sides to see what we got here. We have our downward-firing stereo speakers. We have 2 microSD card slots. Now, the first slot, this is where the system disk goes. So when you have it inserted, it will boot into the Linux side of things, which I tend to prefer, especially with how the firmware has been fleshed out as of late. It's really solid overall, and I really do recommend just sticking with Linux. However, taking this out will get you to Android 11, which actually does offer some conveniences, but you have to sideload all your APKs because the Play Store still isn't there, and we'll touch base on that in a second. They also supply a 64 gigabyte card here, which has a bunch of ROMs on there, which I know a lot of people actually appreciate because sometimes people have difficulty finding them. On the other side, we have our reset switch as well as our power button. Going along the top, we see the resurgence of the inline shoulder keys. They are a slightly different design, and overall, I don't know. I really am starting to wish that they would just have a stacked design and just try to figure out some way to make it as compact as possible. I don't really like these, and I'll touch base on them more when we talking about the controls. But they're serviceable. I just wish that they were positioned better. Then we have our function key. This function key will operate as the back button in Android, but also will be our escape hatch in Linux side. So if ever you're playing a game, you're going to press the function key and it'll give you the RetroArch menu. We have our DC charging here. We have mini HDMI out and our on-the-go USB port, USB-C port, so we can do other peripherals. And then our 3.5mm audio jack. Then we have our volume up and down button. So starting with the front of it, let's talk about the analog sticks. Now, the analog sticks, this is what Anbernic is saying that they're using their Hall sensors. We're going to open up the device and take a look at it in a moment. But here's my little touch on the analog sticks themselves. So check this out. So it was kind of annoying because they did glue the speaker on here. All right, so this is the Hall-based analog controller, and it's crazy. So the only Hall sensors that I know were made by Gillikit, and typically Gillikit would stamp what they have and made, and typically they use like blue indicator pieces on there. Those are like their hallmark stuff. This one says K Silver on it, and on the other one end says Hall. Now this is pretty remarkable because if this looks like the same type of kit that would go in a Joy-Con, so if someone has made a Hall-based replacement for Joy-Cons, this is going to be just a hot seller by itself just to replace Joy-Con parts with. Because why would you put in potentiometer stuff which is going to have drift again when you can put in Hall-based ones and not have that issue? So this alone seems like a big enough deal. Really interesting. So yeah, that's that. All right, so here we're going to be talking about the analog stick portion of this review on the RG353M. And these are Anbernic's now using Hall-based sensors on their analog sticks. First up, we have full range on the entire analog axis. So you can see that I'm making a square box with this little red dot. So on both analog sticks, we have complete range. That's thumbs up for me. That's huge marks for me. The other thing to kind of note here is that there is this cardinal-based dead zone that you see here. It's a bit interesting because, let me just show you. Like, all I have to do is just push a little bit, okay? I push a little bit, and it immediately escapes out of its dead zone. So dead zones are supposed to be used to nullify or cancel erroneous analog input to the game. So if an analog stick is stationary, a dead zone is programmed in to cancel out any arbitrary input that the game would interpret as movement. So a dead zone is created to cancel that out. What we're finding here is that there is a perimeter that is blocked off, and we don't have access to that. So the dead zone is actually like physically very small, but to a game it's this weird box that you see here. So it's not that the dead zone exists. Like, you can see that it's going to basically kind of flap between a true north or off into a segment. So it wants to hug to a cardinal edge. So you can see basically the perimeter of where that is. And it's not very extreme. It's fine for, you know, how small this analog stick is. So if you wanted, like, you know, absolute movement in any which way, you're going to get that. But you do still have, you know, pretty good analog sensitivity across the entire... My camera would focus here. It's really hard with this really dark colored case to capture this. But you can see I can paint the entire area. So overall, the analog sticks are actually very good. The dead zone internally is almost non-existent. It just how it communicates the sensitivity outside to a game that is different. Hopefully that makes sense, because the dead zone is actually absolutely tiny on these analog sticks. And it has a tendency that it wants to hug to the cardinal directions, which isn't that bad. It's not very, very extreme, but it's present. So if you're the type of person that doesn't like that, if you want full freedom of analog movement, this is not going to give you that. This is going to assist in its analog capacity in some way. Overall, still very, very good. I want to make this point, is that the dead zones are actually almost basically non-existent. You will find that you have total input everywhere. It's just that it has a bias towards specific leanings. Here, this might make more sense with actual numbers. So you can see 0. Typically, with there being like no dead zone actually, but once the first actual input that is received is 0.19. So we don't start super, super low and make our way up. We actually start at basically like 0.2. Basically, that is not a dead zone of the sticks, but a dead zone of what is being sent to a game, that we will only start at 0.15 instead of 0.01. You know what I mean? So that's basically it. There actually is no real dead zone on the stick. It's just what's communicated to the game that is being restricted here. Not a big deal, but just something that I thought I would mention. So overall, the analog sticks are actually really good. The dead zones, for what they're worth, are really just assistive. They're not really overbearing too much, but they do assist in a certain way, and there will be some magnetism, so just be aware of that. For how low profile they are and how much actual range you got, it's fine. Overall, the actual kind of material that they have on here, this is kind of my preference. I just wish that there was a concavity in here instead of convex. That's just my preference. For the face buttons, this is once again something that Anbernic always gets right. I never really had any problem. And face buttons, I don't think most people have a problem with. There have been mushy face buttons, but not in a long time. But these are super crunchy, very nice to press. Now we're going to start talking about the D-pad. I'm going to go actually ahead and load up into a game so that we can do this. I'm going to go ahead and load Third Strike. Now, one of the things that I always demo is being able to hit diagonals, and one problem area that Anbernic typically always has a problem with is in the bottom right, the southeast portion of the D-pad. I've always found that it was more difficult to hit over here versus on the left-hand side. Thankfully, on this particular unit, I haven't really had any particular issue in that regard. If you find yourself being someone that wants to actually play fighting games on a handheld, the 353M is actually pretty decent. I mean, so you can see it's not just, you know, constantly going and doing Dragon Punches. It's the ability to making sure whatever button you're going to press is what you are looking to accomplish. And that even goes for just like, you know, double tapping in a specific direction, which is, you know, if you were to want to parry, everything matters with regard to how accurate the input is when you're pressing it. And the 353M is an excellent membrane-based D-pad. This is probably the best that I've ever had from Anbernic. So really good job, and I don't know if it's just the metal casing that is solidifying everything, but overall this is the best D-pad that I've had. And that's not to say Anbernic's D-pads are always very good. It's just that this one has been one that I haven't had a problem hitting on the bottom right from the get-go. So overall, excellent D-pad there as well. And then rounding out with talking about the specs of the build quality of the device is just taking a look at the 640x480 panel itself. It is actually super nice. Again, it's difficult for me to try to capture with the dark shell around this and the screen itself, so I'm going to try my best here. When it comes to things that I care about, with pixel density, the aspect ratio, response rate, contrast ratio, hopefully this comes through, but the panel is super nice. That nice high definition 640x480 in this particular size. 4:3 aspect ratio, so now a lot of retro games are going to be really nice to play on. But even just taking a look at the contrast ratio and the response rate, you can take a look at like just look at Sonic going into these clouds and seeing that there's very little ghosting going on. The pixel response time is very nice. It is an excellent panel overall. So this is a nice demo. Sonic is typically a nice demo because of the high contrast colors that are all over the place. And it really just makes everything pop. So that's where we're going to end it with the build quality. This is without a doubt the most refined rock chip 3566 device that Anbernic has made. When it comes to heat transference, yeah, you're going to notice it with the metal that is on here because metal is going to be a better thermal conductor than plastic is. So whenever you're going to be playing at length or charging from zero, you will notice that there is some warmth that transfers through the metal casing, but it's not that bad. And then you have these rubber pads. Again, they're not really something that you're going to feel. They're just to kind of make sure it doesn't slip around when you're placing it down. So this is, without a doubt, Anbernic's best rock chip 3566 device. Let's go ahead and touch base on Android, and then we'll talk about Linux, do some game demos, and then do my conclusion for this device. Okay, I'm going to take a brief moment to talk about the Android side of the RG353M. For the most part, there are a little bit of more tweaks and finishes that Anbernic has put into this. You can see that I just pulled down and pressed this little Anbernic button right there. And what that does is it brings up a launcher so that you can quickly and easily just go through and pick games through a front-end launcher instead of worrying about going through each independent emulator itself to pick a game. The only thing to mention here is that while you're in this particular menu, if you press select, you're going to go over to the game settings, and then here you can actually recycle a game or push to different paths. You can see that all of these are already pretty much listed. So this now opens up in RetroArch, and for the most part works really well. For me, I'm not a big fan of front-end launchers to begin with, so perhaps I'm just old and I don't really care. I just like to go into the emulators themselves and start working with them. The other thing to note here is that there is a little touchscreen mapper software, so if you go ahead and touch this, you might also have to hold it down to bring it up. But with this, you can actually just move around. Let me get out of there. If you get the B button, you can move it around. What would happen here is when you press the B button where I put it, this would now correspond to a touch input by pressing this button. This is something that I feel like a lot of Android game player systems should have because it makes playing games that are Android touch-based that only support that playable on a device like this. So it's really nice, but there is no play support. So not having any play support is, in my opinion, still a bummer, but I know there are people that actually enjoy not having that option because there are custom firmware where people show and make builds to actually install play firmware on there. But for me, I like it to be already there. Here we can see that it's already a Nintendo Switch layout, and that is, B is B, A is A. So A is accept and B is cancel, much like the Japanese style for PlayStation. Now, if we go to Xbox mode, this swaps them over. So now this is A, and this is B, and this is X, and this is Y. Much like Sega Dreamcast or Xbox. For what it's worth, that's what I tend to prefer, but also when you're doing like Xbox Cloud streaming, this is a big help so that all the buttons correspond to where you think they should be, and that's a real big bonus for me. The other thing that you're going to get from Android is you're going to be able to pick like PlayStation 2 emulation and GameCube emulation. For what it's worth, there are a few games that are on PS2 that will be kind of playable on this device. On GameCube, you may find one or two, but I want to kind of just set expectations that you shouldn't anticipate being able to play GameCube or PlayStation 2, even with Dolphin MMJ R2, which is on here. And thankfully, it also auto-updates and now supports newer .rvz files, so that's super awesome that that's there, but we still don't actually have enough horsepower to actually get it across the finish line. The other thing worth noting is that the F button acts as the back button, which is nice that there's a hardware back button without having to swipe up to go to the gestures to, bring up anything. So that's something that I really enjoy, but just glad that it's there. Overall, I love having the ability to have Android here. I use Mixplorer to kind of do my file management and connect to my NAS and pull over ROMs. So it's a nice way instead of having to take out the SD card and put ROMs on that way. So I am glad that it is ultimately here, but for the most part, I tend to prefer the Linux side outside of game streaming, but the aspect ratio doesn't really make much sense. One thing that I was pretty interested in was with the all-metal construction of this device was if the Wi-Fi performance would still be pretty good. I am on 5 gigahertz right now, and it doesn't seem that it's all that impacted by having a complete metal shell. So you can see that my latency is really good, my up and down is really good, and it's been pretty consistent, actually. So that's a bit surprising to see how well the Wi-Fi works with this all-metal casing. So kudos to Anbernic for figuring that part out.
Welcome back, Fox. Turn around when it is safe to do so.
Okay, so we touched base on the Wi-Fi performance there. Now let's just see how it works while we're streaming games. And once again, I'm really surprised that the metal exterior case really isn't interfering at all. Forza Horizon 5 is one game where there is a lot of activity on the screen and a lot of things being updated at once, and we're not seeing any real artifacting going on with trying to keep up or buffering or anything. So overall, really impressive showing. Now, it is a 4x3 screen, so I don't think it's the most optimal screen to be playing streaming games on. And look at how much stuff is getting updated on the screen. We're not seeing any actual artifacting, any latency drops. It's really, really impressive to see, considering the all-metal shell not interfering with that wireless signal. So check it out. There's actually a few things to kind of talk about here. And this is why the battery is actually the sole source of heat that transfers through to the metal on the back. So when you're using this device at length or charging from 0 to 100%, that's where all of the heat is going to be building up on this, and it's going to instantly transfer to this backplate, and that's where you're going to notice all of the heat. The other thing to note here is the Wi-Fi test that I was doing. I was wondering how they were getting such good reception from the antenna, and it's all from this side. They actually have the antenna lead mounted to this plastic side piece. I thought this was, I was trying to wonder, it feels like metal right here. And this is where it's actually kind of broadcasting out. So if you push your hand too close, you'll actually be interfering with it. But so yeah, this is where the radio from the antenna was going out, and this is how we were able to get, pretty decent speeds. Also interesting that it is just a single pole and doing all that over 5 gigahertz and doing a good job of it. Right now I'm going to go ahead and jump into the Linux side of things, and what we're going to do here is power this down, and right here you can see just to enter into Android mode you would just remove the SD card that is in TF1. So I'm going to go ahead and take the operating system here. What's nice here is that you can also, there are some custom firmwares that are available, so if you were ever wanting to try out other ones like Jellos, that this would be a nice opportunity to try other operating systems that are a little bit more fine-tuned. But the default Linux operating system that comes with the device is still actually really nice. So here we go, we have the vertical arcade section. I'll go in here, and I'm going to play Circus Charlie, which is a game that I actually really like. I played a lot in my childhood. Okay. I used to love Circus Charlie when I was a kid. Oh, Christmas. No, no, no. Oh, I got greedy there. There we go. Really cool. And then you can press the function button to quickly exit out of this or bring up the menu. Let's go ahead and take a look at some other TATE mode games. This is a really nice way to play TATE mode games. Just feels better overall. Feels like you're just maximizing the screen and also the playstyle. We're going to quickly jump through and show what types of games are going to be playable. So there is MAME, which is your traditional arcade. Then you have the Wondersawn color. Rounding out some of the things that we can look at in the Linux side is that there is this Kodi Media Center, which is really cool because if you wanted to output through HDMI here, if you wanted to fill your SD card with movies or something, this is going to be one way for traveling where you can actually just play through the Kodi Media Center. That is a cool little feature. That's not something that I personally would think that I would find myself caring about, but it does exist here, and if it's something that you wanted, then you can actually, take a look at that. And then again, if you're at the main menu, you can just press select, bring up the Anbernic manual. This is such a nice little touch. I really love just seeing a properly formatted little pamphlet, so you don't need to keep it with you. You can always just kind of just cycle through and see what options are for either PSP or Nintendo DS, just to get a quick primer on what you need to do and how you're going to control stuff. There are a lot of games, and again, what you're going to be topping out here on again is N64 and Dreamcast. On the Android side, PS2 and GameCube is there, but again, I don't want to set expectations that you're going to be playing very many PS2 or GameCube games. There might be one or two, and a few more so on PS2 than GameCube. It's there. Just don't get your hopes up or try to buy this device thinking that you're going to have a wide variety of games to play on that side. That's pretty much my look at Anbernic's latest RG353M. The deep purple is super nice. D-pad, face buttons, analogs are super nice. That's it for my review. As always, guys, thank you for your time. And thanks for watching.